Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles. I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of deep South Texas. We continue our coverage of yesterday's edition where we watched as events unfolded live as a teenager from the Rio Grande Valley who plays in an award-winning high school mariachi band here in McAllen was released from an ICE detention facility escorted by a local Republican congresswoman. Now, right after the edition, his entire family was released from another ICE detention facility outside of San Antonio, the Dilley facility. They were all arrested February 25th as the family went to a mandatory meeting with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement officials. Later in today's program, we are speaking live with the lawyer, Efren Olivares, who represents the teen. Efren helped to negotiate his release, and he'll be talking with our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez, so make sure to stay tuned for that. But first, it was an emotional homecoming for 18-year-old Antonio Gamez Cuellar. KVEO's Jorge Vela was at McAllen High last night as the community welcomed him home.
Around 7:45, the family arrived here to McAllen High School and was greeted by a multitude of friends and community members. Around 7:45, honking could be heard as the family was arriving, and the crowd, nothing but joy and tears. A family thankful, but also with what they call a new perspective on what's going on across the country.
I want to tell to all the people to open their eyes and to see that some people are getting separate and that it is not fair that some people, good people, have to pass for that.
For Antonio's friends, it was a moment they have hoped for since they found out the news.
We were restless, completely restless. We couldn't sleep, crying. We were at adoration for days praying, just praying that a miracle would happen, and it happened. It happened today.
Friends were not just in the crowd. Parents of friends and even community members were united with emotion.
They're very humble, very kind, always ready to say hello, and just the nicest people you can meet. And you know, that's why it was such a shock.
They just do not deserve what has happened to them in these last 2 weeks, and I just can't imagine what they've been going through. I'm a mother, I'm a teacher, I'm a musician. Nobody deserves to be treated like that, and this is America, and we should all be welcome.
Luis Antonio Gamez Martinez explains that the hardest thing was not going into custody himself, but seeing his own son in handcuffs. As he also says, this is the first time they had ever been separated for so long. The longest we were apart was when they traveled with the mariachi, but we knew they were doing well and we're happy, and we were never separated for that long. But beyond all of that, I think we're going to become much more united as a family. Martinez also describes how the family has restrictions to only travel within a 75-mile radius of the valley as their legal process continues. However, they say they're more united than ever, and it was music and faith that kept the family strong during the ordeal.
To people in this situation, to be strong and go look up at God, because without Him, you cannot do anything. God is the best thing that can ever happen to everybody. It happened to him, to me, and He was the only inspiration that I had to keep going every single day without my parents.
The family says they intend to continue with their immigration process, and Antonio says he hopes to graduate this spring from McAllen High School. For NBC 23 from McAllen, I'm Jorge Vela.
Now it's time to bring in our South Texas correspondent, Sandra Sanchez, and our guest for today's program, Efren Olivares. Thanks for joining us again today, Efren.
Thank you for having me.
Efren, you are our vice president there at the National Immigration Law Center, vice president of litigation and legal strategy. And you are no stranger to the public. You helped to negotiate the release of the children who were put on planes Labor Day weekend to be deported to Guatemala. We have spoken about that. And now here you are seen coming out of the Raymondville El Valle detention facility right beside Antonio Gamez Cuellar. Tell us about this case. Tell us about the arrest of him and his family. When and how did this go down?
Yeah, thank you for having me. Great to see you again. This family came into the U.S. in 2023 through the CBP One app. They applied, made an appointment to request asylum and show up at a port of entry in Brownsville, and that's exactly what they did. They entered the country legally through that process, applied for asylum, and ever since 2023, they have been reporting to ICE check-ins regularly without incident. And when the appointments were during the school year and during business hours, only the parents would come so that the kids wouldn't miss school. Totally normal and routine for families in this situation. For this most recent appointment on February 25th, ICE requested that the family bring the children with them. And when they showed up, they arrested all 5 of them without any justification, without giving them a reason, and no change in circumstances whatsoever. But clearly they were planning to do that, which is why they requested that the children also show up this time.
Is it unusual that ICE, or have you been seeing a trend that ICE has been asking families to suddenly bring the children? And let's just clarify, Emma Guadalupe Cuellar Lopez is his mom, and Luis Antonio Gomez Martinez is the father. He has brother Caleb, 14, and Joshua, 12, and Antonio is 18, and all of them were arrested. So, I mean, is this something you're seeing more of happening now, or is this something that they have done all along?
It's something that this administration has started doing. Before 2025, this was not happening. Folks who have pending cases routinely show up for ICE check-ins with no incident. And that is the point of those check-ins, right? To confirm if you've changed your address, if anything has changed in your case. This administration, though, is arresting people at those routine check-ins for no reason.
So you're saying the children were required, was this during school? It was a school day?
I'm blanking on whether the 25th, it was a school day. Yes, the 25th was.
Okay. Now take us back to yesterday and all that went down there in Raymondville. And then also the rest of the family was held at the Dilley detention facility about 4.5 hours away. Well, what was your involvement there in Raymondville? How did you help to get him out, and did you work alone?
Right. We got wind of this case late last week before it made the news. And one of our attorneys visited Antonio late last week to hear about his case and confirm whether he wanted us to take his case. And he did. So we represented him since then for purposes of trying to secure his release. Then over the weekend, the case just became widely known, first here locally in South Texas, then statewide, then nationwide. And it garnered a lot of attention and sympathy from the general public, from elected officials, from politicians, et cetera. So over the weekend, what we were doing was preparing a legal action that's called a parole request in collaboration with Carlos Moctezuma Garcia from the McAllen law firm of Garcia and Garcia Attorneys at Law. And we filed that with ICE. That's a request to ICE to exercise its discretion to release Antonio, who, even though he's just a kid, he's a teenager, but he's 18 years old as of 2 months ago. So in the eyes of the law, he's an adult. And that's why he was being treated separately and held separately from the rest of his family. So we filed that request on Monday morning. And thankfully, by Monday afternoon, ICE exercised its discretion to release Antonio and his family as well.
I want to ask you, what made this case so different? I mean, we heard from Antonio saying so many people are locked in detention. How were you able to get this family out basically so quickly inside of 2 weeks?
I think there was an immense amount of public pressure on ICE officials, certainly here in South Texas, given the family story. The musical aspect of it also made it a very compelling case for general sympathy. There were efforts of elected officials, including Congresswoman Monica de la Cruz, and that everything came together pushing in the same direction, that the combination of community pressure, first and foremost, but also our legal action and intervention by the Congresswoman also had this happy ending for now.
And how is Antonio doing? And in that piece that Jorge wrote, Antonio said, quote, "Open your eyes. Some people are being separated." I mean, this is a very affected teenage man, right?
Definitely. I think he makes the point that we're all very relieved and happy for him and his family that they are out. But tonight, there will be tens of thousands of men, women, and children sleeping in ICE detention facilities. Stories as compelling as this family's, cases as meritorious as their case, right? And yet, there are tens of thousands of stories that we're not hearing about. Perhaps because they're not a highly talented group of kids that play for the award-winning mariachi. But nonetheless, he makes a very compelling point, and I think it's important for our listeners and our viewers to take home that this is happening every day. This is one happy ending for one family, but there are tens of thousands of people suffering just like they were.
Did he tell you anything that happened to him while he was in the Valle detention facility in Raymondville? Any stories or examples or what he went through?
He was not receiving any schooling while he was there, for example. So he's trying to catch up. He's a senior, so he's 2 months away from graduation. He needs to pass all his classes and do well. And now he's got a few weeks to catch up on. He's taking the SAT this month, so he needs to catch up on his studying for that. Just like the same things that any other high school senior is going through the last semester of their high school life, he was going through, right? And it got violently interrupted by ICE, but thankfully he's plugging back into school and hopefully, will graduate this May. He shared that his shoes were stolen while he was in ICE, so he didn't get his shoes back. He got some other pair of loaners, I think. But it's not unheard of things happening to immigration detainees, unfortunately. But he seemed in good health and grateful and relieved to be out yesterday.
Going to the Dilley facility, I know you were down here in Raymondville, but we heard from Congressman Joaquin Castro of San Antonio when shortly after they released the rest of his family from the Dilley facility. When describing what he saw inside the facility over the last couple of visits that he's made over the last couple months, one of the things that he spoke about yesterday was that he spoke with a mother, a soon-to-be mother, that hadn't received medical treatment in a few weeks. And at her last medical appointment to see how the baby was doing, she was actually told by medical personnel that she needed to eat more because the baby wasn't growing. You know, going back to this request that you and other attorneys put in to make a case to get these people released on parole, does medical play a role in that, or do we see cases like that woman that Congressman Castro was talking about? Do we see them get released on parole, or is that typically not enough for them to be let out of these facilities?
I'm not familiar with that specific case, but I can tell you that conditions in immigration detention are deplorable. People don't get quality food. They don't get enough recreation time. They routinely fail to receive the necessary medical treatment. People have died in ICE custody, right? In the custody of our government. They're not even able to keep people alive, right? So I'm not surprised, sadly, that this poor woman is not receiving the necessary medical treatment, but it is the norm for ICE detention that people are treated horribly and do not receive medical treatment.
There were some signs that we saw that the Welcome Home group called him Shrimp because he's a very tall young man. I can gather he appears to be about 6 feet, maybe over. Did he get enough food aside from his shoes being stolen? Anything else happened to him? Did he, that he complained about? Was he harassed or bullied or cold or, sleeping on the floor?
He said he prayed a lot while he was inside. And I didn't meet him before he was detained, so I couldn't tell you if he lost weight or not. But he seemed relieved yesterday and in good spirits.
We're going to take a quick break. We're speaking with Efrain Olivares, Vice President of Litigation and Legal Strategy for the National Immigration Law Center, about the case that we've been covering for several days now. So stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. Joining me today, South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez, and our guest for today's program, Mr. Efrain Olivares, Vice President of Litigation and Legal Strategy for the National Immigration Law Center.
Efrain, you mentioned lawmakers that were involved in helping to get Antonio Gámez-Cuellar released. You mentioned Congresswoman Monica de la Cruz, Congressional District 15 here in Texas, but it was her opponent, a Democratic nominee, Bobby Pulido, a Latin Grammy-winning singer who is running against her in the general in November, who actually, really blasted this on social media and put constant pressure on this case. Even we saw Antonio pulling up in Polito's van there at the high school last night. I think we have a clip of what Polito told our Jorge Vela, how his involvement and how this evolved. Do we have that clip?
I was in mariachi in high school. I struck a nerve. And this is not politics, it's humanitarian. It's just separating families like that, I don't think is right, especially when they did everything the right way. And it just angered me.
Congresswoman De La Cruz was seen, she held a very brief press conference beside you, and she said, let's not make this political, but we have a lot of involvement from lawmakers. So how did politics play into this release?
I'm really grateful to everyone who spoke up and did something to try to have the Gámez Cuellar family released. And it was not just the two of them, but other congressmen and congresswomen, local elected officials, mayors, candidates running for different types of positions. A lot of people spoke out, and I am grateful to all of them. For me, this is very much about politics. Politics is why ICE is doing what it is doing. Politics is why this family was detained. Politics is absolutely the reason why we're seeing the atrocities that ICE agents are committing across the country against families like the Cuellar family, legal permanent residents, and even U.S. citizens. That is absolutely, in my view, about politics. And it is a travesty. But and when illegalities happen, we intervene. That's our role as attorneys for the human rights survivors and human rights victims. But I don't think this is, to me, it's not a feel-good story. It's a feel outrage story because this should never have happened. And the reason it happened is politics.
Mi Familia Vota, which is a nonprofit organization that helps migrants, issued a statement about it. They were critical of Monica De La Cruz, saying, quote, she wants to have it both ways. She voted to fund DHS without accountability measures, then take credit for helping them out of this unnecessary and cruel detention. I mean, did you feel that, she did vote for the big, beautiful bill, and she has been outspoken about deportation and arrest of those who come to this country seeking asylum. How did you feel standing next to her and Antonio as he was coming out of the facility yesterday?
I'm really grateful to her for all her efforts to get Antonio out.
Well, it truly was a bipartisan measure. I mean, that was unprecedented to see a Republican congresswoman coming out of that facility. She, I guess, stepped up and did what her constituents wanted her to do.
Again, I'm glad she intervened and did what she could, and that Antonio and his family are out.
Speaking of the political aspect of this, from the national perspective, we just saw that Kristi Noem will be leaving the Department of Homeland Security in the coming weeks. She's going to be replaced by Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin. Do you see that being a positive change, or do you think things will be status quo?
Unfortunately, I don't think changing the figurehead at the head of DHS is going to result in the changes that we need to see when it comes to immigration enforcement in this country. The amount of money that Congress has appropriated for ICE and CBP and Border Patrol and DHS as a whole is astronomical and not justified given our current situation when it comes to immigration in the U.S. I wish I could tell you that changing the person at the head of the department is going to result in those changes, but I am not too hopeful. We will continue doing our work, continuing holding officials and government agents accountable when they violate the rights of individuals, regardless of their immigration status, and continue this fight.
I'm curious because we mentioned the Dilley facility and the other family members that were there. They were released hours later. We know that Joaquin Castro, Net Barragan, there were several Congress representatives who were on a CODA, a congressional delegation visit to Dilley yesterday. Coincidentally, they met with Cuellar, the Gámez Cuellar family. Were you in touch with Congressman Castro? Did you know what they were doing? I mean, how did these two events happen at the same time? Tell us.
I was not, so we were representing Antonio only, not the rest of his family at Dilley. And I only saw the reports that were made public on social media and other outlets about that congressional delegation and Congressman Castro's efforts on behalf of the rest of the family.
But I bet you're glad that all of this happened. It was just amazing the way it all came together so quickly. You know, we do hear about families and people who remain separated for months and even years, right? So this seems to be an extraordinary case.
It is extraordinary and remarkable that they were liberated so quickly and almost at the same time. I was with Antonio for minutes, for about an hour after he got out, and he was able to speak to his parents who had just gotten out within minutes of him getting out. So that is almost made up, or you couldn't make it up. It rarely happens, and I don't know that it was coordinated by anyone. It just so happened that everyone was released within an hour, 2-hour time frame.
You know, Antonio is he is 18 years old. He's a man in the eyes of the law, but he's still a senior in high school, obviously living with his parents, dependent on them. What would have happened with him, or what happens with people, young men and women in his situation when they're released and maybe the rest of their family remains in detention?
Right. So he's, as you were saying, he's just a kid, but he's an adult for the law. So ICE was, just waiting for somebody to pick him up and release him. Otherwise, they were going to drive him to the bus station in Harlingen and drop him off because he's an adult, technically. But again, he's just a kid in school. So luckily, we were able to show up there as his lawyers, as was Congresswoman De La Cruz, and then they released him to us in that moment.
He just had a birthday, I understand, like a month ago. He just turned 18. Is that right?
He turned 18 in January. Had this happened before he was 18, everyone would have been detained together.
Together. Okay. And your organization is representing him pro bono?
Yes, we provide legal services free of charge to our clients, thanks to our supporters. And yes, we represented him in this release effort.
Now, they're an award-winning mariachi family. I mean, he was part of the 2025 National Award-winning Mariachi Oro team from Mac High. They placed second this past year. They went to Washington, D.C. There's a picture of them in front of the White House. I mean, in Jorge's piece, it mentions some restrictions going forward, can't leave within 75 miles. So what does this do as far as his future aspirations, college or performances? How does this limit him?
So he has an appointment with ICE in 2 weeks later this month, and all of those terms and conditions will be specified then. And that will get clarity because there are some competitions that are coming up that they may need to travel for with the mariachi. And he was, in the all-state mariachi team, he was first chair trumpet. So that means he's the best high school trumpet player in the state of Texas.
We've been speaking with Efrain Olivares, Vice President of Litigation and Legal Strategy for the National Immigration Law Center, and also working on behalf of Antonio Gamez Cuellar, who we've been following for the last several days now. Unfortunately, we are out of time, Efrain, but we again appreciate you joining us so much today.
We'll have you back on, and we'd love to talk about the Guatemalan children more at that time.
Gladly. We'll do that. We'll do that some other time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Medelis, your host here in Harlingen, Texas. Got a follow-up to a story that we told you about Friday with our San Diego correspondent, Salvador Rivera. Now, he's been discussing and looking into the bishop that's been charged with several crimes out in his area of responsibility. Well, we've learned today that Pope Leo has accepted the resignation of the Catholic Bishop of San Diego, Emmanuel Shaletta. Now, this was announced today by the Vatican after the bishop was arrested on embezzlement and money laundering charges. Bishop Shaletta pleaded not guilty to 17 felony charges during his arraignment in court in California on Monday, while many of his supporters were present. If you'd like to read more about that story, you can go to borderreport.com right now. Over $300,000 in Air Jordan tennis shoes were stolen from a cargo train in Arizona, and authorities say 8 men have been arrested. That was after a U.S. Customs and Border Protection helicopter reportedly recorded 6 people unloading 23 crates of the popular Nike shoes from a railway boxcar that was stopped along the tracks last Monday, about 24 miles east of Winslow, Arizona. That's just northeast of Phoenix. Our Border Report's Julian Resendiz reports that the rail tracks between Needles, California and the Phoenix area in the past years have become a favorite for stalking ground for transnational criminal organizations based in Sinaloa, Mexico. You can read more on that story as well at borderreport.com. That's going to do it for today's edition. For our South Texas correspondent Sandra Sanchez, my name is Rudy Mireles here in Harlingen, Texas. We'll see you all next time.